for other states that will realize that, if they need to be, that if they have to file for bankruptcy, they will be bailed out by the government. But they have not stated how many states are nearing bankruptcy, how many states might actually, or how many states might have to apply for bankruptcy soon, how many people the U.S. will apparently automatically bail out. They haven't stated how many states this will affect, and because of that, we don't know if it's just one other state that's nearing bankruptcy, or if it's going to be all of them, because the negation team fails to say this, so we don't really understand why this matters, or why we should even care about this whatsoever. I'm sorry, that was part of their first contention. Their second contention is about how ineffective this will be, because more people will have no revenue, Detroit will have no revenue, and that there will be repeating problems. But if we're creating more jobs in Detroit through the third of Detroit that's vacant, and building up these lots, and building up this space, which is creating jobs, creating businesses, if more people are coming to Detroit, there's obviously more money going into Detroit, there's more money being paid through income taxes, there's more workers, so there's more money flowing back into Detroit. Their third contention was that alternatives that will cost a lot but have the same benefits, but they're still costing a lot, as the negation team said. So really their alternatives, neither of which they stated, will also cost a lot, as ours doesn't, because we're just throwing away chump change. Just a minute. Actually, I don't have enough time, I'm sorry. So really with these alternatives that they did not state, they're also not solving because they still cost a lot, as the negation team stated. So we're really not helping out Detroit at all with their alternatives. Now into my own contentions. They covered our contentions with a blanket rebuttal in that, well, it's ineffective, it's not going to work, this doesn't solve for anything. We're not solving unemployment, we're not solving poverty, we're not solving crime, we're decreasing it, we're reducing it, which is the main thing. Because since the net benefits are to Detroit, to the people of Detroit and to Detroit, if we're proving at all that there's more net benefits to the people of Detroit through our plan than through the status quo that the negation team is supporting, then we win this round. And really, through their status quo, they're not solving for any of the issues that we are trying to solve either. So when they're saying that, well, it's not going to work, it's not going to do this, in reality what they're fighting for isn't going to solve it either. And they haven't stated how the status quo will solve for itself, haven't implemented a plan that will solve Detroit's problems. So all of our point contentions about unemployment, poverty, crime, and education, they still stand in this round because they simply say, or the negation simply says that they will get better by themselves, or this won't work, our plan doesn't solve for this. But in reality, our plan does solve for this, because since we're allowing Detroit to do this themselves, to establish themselves more as a city, simply with our federal loan, we're still solving for this because there will be more money going into Detroit, as I have said several times, and because Detroit is solving this problem themselves, with the exception of the loan, they are establishing themselves more as a city and will have more respect. And for all these reasons, I urge a strong vote for the negation. Affirmation.
Are you ready? Judges ready? Partners. And with that, I will begin. Thank you all for coming. Just to give you a brief roadmap, I'll first go over the issue with the plan, and then the issue with the net benefits, go into their on case, and then on to our off case. So the first issue with their plan that we have, we cited there's absolutely no solvency because you're only throwing chump change. The side of the affirmation, the member actually agreed that it is just chump change. It's not going to have a huge effect. And she said this as a refutation to our third point. But the other thing to this is that they claim that it is reliable, this number is reliable and will be effective because the mayor of Detroit, who is not even in power right now because they have an emergency manager, but the other point they also claim is because the governor of Michigan has also asked for this money. But first, let's take a step back and look at how reliable these two sources are. Detroit has drowned themselves. They have not even been able to acquire property tax. Why should we trust a city and their leaders who can't even maintain its own government, can't even collect its own taxes, on asking for a number which they could actually just acquire themselves if they got back their taxes? And that's actually a huge part of their argument. They just assume that because these two bodies have made this decision and made this request, that it inherently will solve everything, and they're completely ignoring all the judgments that we have cited today. And then to their argument on net benefits, they cite that it should only be for Detroit because this plan is giving money to Detroit. But where is this money coming from? It's coming from the US government. Every single taxpayer throughout America will be contributing to this fund. That affects every single US citizen who pays taxes, every single taxpayer. That also affects all the cities that this establishes a precedent for. This will affect cities like LA and Baltimore, who's on the brink of bankruptcy like Detroit was Detroit is right now. So it does set a dangerous precedent for cities around the nation. It costs the whole U.S. population money. So that is the reason why we, as the side of the nation, will argue that you should expand the net benefits to the United States of America and not isolate it to just Detroit. The second thing is they argue that Detroit only has 1/3 of what a city used to be, so that population is extremely minimal. Okay, now on to the solvency of their plan. We argue that there's absolutely no solvency because they're going to be loaning $500 million. They have actually not shown you how this money will be distributed throughout the city, but how we understand Title IX bankruptcy works is that when you get money, the first thing you have to do is pay your creditors back. The city of Detroit currently has 100,000 creditors. They're going to have to pay these people back. None of this money will be going into solving their harms of hiring more police, solving education. That plan is completely insolvent. They're just going to be paying back their creditors. So the issue we have to take a step back and look that this does not invest a single dollar into Detroit itself. It does not pay back public employees. And now on to their contingents. Their contingents is actually just based off one point, and then their points are actually just impacts. So the point that they're actually, the main point is solving unemployment, or reducing unemployment, and their impacts are unemployment, poverty, crime, education. All four of these are linked to solving the issue of unemployment because you have to pay teachers and whatnot. Again, they are not investing a single dollar into the city of Detroit. They're not going to be hiring more teachers because they have to pay back the debt that they owe. When I owe someone money, if I owe the bank $100 and I get $100, I'm not just going to go spend $100. I'm going to have to pay these people back, and that's one of the requirements in a Title IX bankruptcy case. So that actually refutes all four of their points. But let's just look through their points individually. First, the issue of unemployment. They say they'll solve this because people will want to invest back into the city. But this does not solve the issue because, as my partner said, people leave the city because there are no more jobs. The jobs are leaving because companies like GM, like Ford, are moving out of the city of Detroit. They're moving down south to Ohio, to Kentucky to build their factories. Why? Because it is cheaper. They don't solve for that issue of the cost of these factories in Detroit. Therefore, they have no solvency on the point of unemployment. The second issue they have is the issue of poverty. Again, this is based off if they are able to solve unemployment, they might be able to solve poverty. But again, they don't solve this because their plan does not bring jobs back into the city. The third point is crime. Again, they have no money to be paying back or to pay for these police officers because they are going to have no money at the end of the day under their plan. They have no way to solve for the issue of them not being able to get revenue. They don't solve for the issue of them not taking back tax revenue. And the fourth point is education. Again, in order to solve for education, you must be able to hire more teachers as they cited. But again, they can't hire teachers because they have no money. Now on to our off case. The first issue that we brought up was debt and how it's such a dangerous precedent. This side of the affirmation claims that it won't affect GDP, but let's look at the two worlds today. They're going to be making America spend more money while we will not. That inherently increases our debt, and according to Ben Bernanke, if we don't solve this issue on debt, we will be shrinking our GDP by 14%. Though we don't solve for this issue necessarily, we won't be increasing the damages that this will cause. So if you just compare this one of the two worlds, we have less detriments than they do on that single point. The other thing is that it sets a dangerous precedent for other cities like LA, like Baltimore, who will be expecting to be bailed out. The other thing is sets a dangerous precedent for future cities to spend recklessly. Because if I know that the US government will pay me or will give me money to bail me out, then why would I be effective with my money? Why would I take my money seriously? Why would I use my money or collect taxes? Why would I do any of that if I know the US government is just going to throw money at me? And now to the second issue on ineffectiveness. We brought this point up because it's actually one of the huge issues in today's case of lacking a solvency. They claim, they claim that it would be effective just by stating their plan again. They're going to say it's effective because you spend $500 million and then all these jobs and all these things will pop up. But again, you don't have that solvency because you don't provide a plan to save jobs. The other thing is that they don't solve how this money will be distributed anyways. And now to the third and final issue that we have brought up, that the current status quo solves the plan much better than they do. And the huge reason for this is because by making sure that cities like Detroit learns their lesson, knows how to spend money correctly, but more important, knows and sends a message to other cities that if you are running your city recklessly, you will need to pay. And that's something that the side of the negation really wants to point out today. Is such a huge and dangerous president, and Kevin Orr, who was the one who helped bail out GM, was the one, or is the emergency manager, and he has experience in doing this on the side of the affirmations, just throwing money around and providing absolutely no solvency. And for those reasons, I would just strong vote for the side of the negation.
Is everyone ready?
Mm-hmm.
All good? Alright. As I start my time for my last speech of today's debate, I would like to once again thank everyone for being here, my partner, the opponents, the three judges, and the audience for making today's debate possible. And again, congratulations to my opponents and to my partner for getting this far in today's tournament. So I'm going to, throughout my speech, I just want to make this really simple. I don't want to make this complicated because some of the arguments that have come up have been pretty complicated. What I want to do is I just want to look at three voting issues of why the negation has won today's debate, short and simple. So looking into the first voter is that my opponents have little to no solvency with their case. And there's a huge impact of having a case that doesn't actually solve the problems that you identify or the problems that you claim you can solve. So let's look into it. My opponent's plan is to throw $500 million at Detroit and say, here you go, solve your problems, and in the meantime, we also want you to reduce unemployment, make it so children aren't starving, make it so people don't hurt themselves with crime, and make it so people can learn better and increase the education system. What we have to understand here is that Detroit, we questioned this number several times. We said, well, really, is $500 million the number we should put it them because we understand they owe around $15 billion, so we must be giving them a bigger number. But they said, well, this is the number Detroit needs to, quote-unquote, get back on their feet. This is a very big issue. Get back on their feet. What happens? We throw some chump change at Detroit. They get back on their feet. Now what? As we've identified, Detroit, because of all of the auto industries that moved south to places like Kentucky, like I said several times, Detroit does not have any revenue. So Detroit gets back on its feet, and after Detroit got this money and they pay back their creditors, as my partner said, they can't solve for these things because they won't essentially be on their feet. They won't essentially have enough revenue to decrease unemployment, to decrease poverty, to decrease the crime rates, and to increase the education system. Now, while I agree that this is a great idea and that sounds awesome, I would love Detroit to have less unemployment, all of these things. That would be great, but we can't do that if we're throwing chump change at Detroit. So my opponent's plan does not solve the problem at hand, even though they wanted to. And as well as this, when we're talking about solvency, my opponents also provide a plan that is and with these harms are already being solved in the status quo. Like I said before, as far as inherency goes, they are already going to mediation, and Kevin Orr, like my partner said, the person who was responsible for bailing out General Motors, he is saying that we're going to set aside this amount of money, so that they're already mediating and trying to fix this problem without the United States federal government intervention. So what we can see here is that my opponent's plan does not solve the problems at hand. You cannot vote for a government team that says they're going to solve unemployment, that says they're going to reduce poverty, that says they will reduce crime rates, and they say they will increase the education system when they actually won't. So going into my second voter is this idea that while we're not solving any problems, what we are doing is we're racking up a huge debt and a huge deficit on the federal level. What we said here, I talked about Ben Bernanke briefly, and I argued that the debt is a very pressing issue in the United States of America, that we cannot afford. First, we cannot afford to bail Detroit out right now. We cannot do that because that's taking money out of the pockets of our future generations, as we said before. But the second point is this idea of precedent. We have to understand that if we make it clear to every single city within the United States of America that if they are ever in a bad situation where they want to file for bankruptcy, we will bail them out. So this doesn't. We're not only arguing that we will have to bail out Detroit, we are also arguing that we will have to bail out any other city who then sees that they can spend recklessly because we will bail them out. And so because of the values of the future generation, because the values of equality, the values of education, we cannot go through with my opponent's plan, especially when they're not solving the problems they say they will. And so going into my third and final voter is this idea of net benefits. Really briefly, there are two sides in today's debate. On my opponent's side, they claim that they will be solving all these problems. They claim that they will be reducing unemployment. They claim that they will be reducing poverty, when in essence they won't, because they are simply throwing chump change at Detroit to get back on its feet. But after Detroit gets back on its feet, it will not be able to pay off this debt. And lastly, in the side of the negation team, we are racking up a gigantic debt for the United States federal government, which is the main reason why you must vote for the negation in today's debate, because my opponents do not solve their problems, and because we will be racking up a gigantic debt. So for those reasons, I have a strong vote in favor of the negation team. Thank you.
Everyone ready? All right, starting my time now. Again, I'd like to say thank you for everyone in attendance, judges, my partner, opponents, and the audience, and again, yeah, congratulations to everyone. Now, I have quite a few problems with this round, which is what I'm going to go over my voter issue. My first voter issue, which is the fact of the main issue they brought up, which is Title IX. What I would like you to realize is that Title IX is a federal law. And therefore, within the state, they may realize that through normal ways and means, as we said, we are implementing this plan, we realize that we are assuming through normal ways and means that we were going to fiat through this federal law, and that they will be able to spend this money on their city and able to solve this. Therefore, they are able to put the money. Point of order,
stopping time. This whole Title IX argument, this response to the Title IX argument, has never been said in the first or second speech, and this is the first time that they've said it. Therefore, we have no time to respond.
You guys brought it up in the op block, so he's allowed to address it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go for it.
Continuing that argument, like I said, it's a federal, and through this normal ways and means, they will be able to fiat this through the government, and therefore it will be approved for Detroit to spend this money on their own. Now, going to my second voter issue, which is the main thing that they had a problem with, which is our plan. Now, the first thing is they said, why should we even believe your plan? Why should we believe the governor of Detroit, the governor of Michigan and the mayor of Detroit? They're not responsible. They're not doing this. They were saying, we know what Detroit needs. Why should we trust two high school kids over the governor and the mayor? Why should we trust you? I think I'm going to go with a governor who's been spending his whole main life in politicalness, a governor as well as a mayor, over you and your small plans. And they brought up the fact of this Kevin, I forgot his last name, but of the GM, and then how he's going to bail him out. And they talked about taxes and how this, and the major thing is their money thing, this money issue, which is the fact that they talked about how he said that this $115 million of taxes will solve it. I am very confused on this money issue, which is the fact that, so first of all, they say $500 million is chump change. Then they're saying $115 million in this taxes will solve for it. And then they're saying $500 million is chump change, but it's going to have a great impact on the U.S. economy. And then they're saying $115 million is going to solve $15 billion, $500 million compared to $16 trillion. They're contradicting themselves constantly with the fact of, is this money going to solve it or is it not? Is it enough money or is it not? And basically, in our plan, we are sticking to the fact that $500 is enough based on the fact that we have the governor and the well of a mayor versus two high school students that just want to say assume and want to say that no, this is not going to work. And therefore, this plan is solvent. This is solvent because we are reducing these rates because, like we said, Detroit is able to put this money into their own economy, able to put it into there. Like we said, creating more jobs, reduces the crime rate, reduces the poverty rate. reduces unemployment rate, and therefore has more money into the economy of Detroit to return Detroit to the major stature that it used to be. And what they said, like they said, the president, that all these other cities are gonna be, we're gonna say that we're gonna bail every other city out. Can you tell me one city that's as bad as Detroit? Yeah, they say these cities are on the brink. They brought up LA. LA has Hollywood, one of the major businesses and one of the major revenue businesses in the United States. They will make it. They will be okay. There's not one city that is as bad as Detroit on all of these different levels. Now let me just put you in a comparison of the two worlds. In their world, they don't even know how much money they're spending. They don't even know how much money has an effect on the U.S. They don't know how much money an effect has on Detroit. They don't even know what they're talking about. They think that $115 million will solve it, but then they say $500 million won't solve it. They don't know what they're talking about, and they're going against the fact of a governor and a mayor. In their plan, you want to trust 2 high school students that will not solve for anything and that will have these leave a worse Detroit, leave the fact that Detroit will be crime-ridden, that Detroit will have all of these horrible things, or do you want to vote for our world where we will have less unemployment, less poverty, less crime, and a higher education rate? In Detroit, more money flowing into Detroit, Detroit becoming what it used to be, one of the major and most best cities in the United States of America. Do you want to vote for the fact that Rosetta Newby doesn't have to be scared, a 75-year-old doesn't have to be scared to walk out of her house because she's afraid that she's going to get shot? Do you want to be scared? Do you want to vote for the fact that we will be able to have more officers protecting the streets of Detroit? Do you want to vote for the fact that you will now have a more literate, more Detroit? Do you want to vote for the fact that Detroit may be able to return to the major precedent that it used to be in the United States of America? It's up to you. The decision is all yours. And for all these reasons, I urge a strong vote for the affirmation team.
What's inside? Oh. I went to after that.
Yeah.
This is still filming.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Okay.
All right, so we'll announce, and then the judges will each offer their reason for decision. We'll start with the squirrel first.
Oh, God damn it.
It's not yours.
Seriously?
And so we have a 2-1 decision for the affirmation in this round. So Sean, Haley, you won. So congratulations. All right, and the one vote that went for the negation is Ms. Fastola, so she'll give her RFD first.
Alright, so first of all, I bought the net benefit change. I think that generally speaking, the net benefits should involve the actor. Why would the United States federal government do something without considering the interests of all Americans? And I didn't buy what a member of government said when it said it didn't take away ground for them. I think not considering all Americans absolutely did take away ground for litigation, which you guys seem to agree with considering you argued about the debt and the deficit and precedent, which were all arguments that involved all of the Americans. So I did accept the change in net benefits. Now, I think the biggest place, or one of the biggest influences in my vote was I think government failed to argue why Detroit's bankruptcy was bad for the United States. You proved to me that it's bad for the people living there. I get that. There's a lot of crime, it's poor, there's a lot of vacancy, quality of life has decreased. So I get that the population of Detroit has been negatively affected by this, but there was no argumentation that came for government as to how Detroit's bankruptcy was bad for the United States, was bad for other Americans, anything like that. I mean, you guys could have talked about the fact that you now have all of these unemployed people who are going to have to move. I don't know how crime could spread, how they're going to create more unemployment elsewhere, how some argument about the effects on industry. It just wasn't ever extended to greater consequences outside of the city of Detroit itself. And I want to talk a little bit about the issue of Title IX. I definitely accepted that government had the right to respond, as that wasn't brought up until the opposition block. However, I also just didn't really buy Gov's response to that. I feel like as a judge I'm uncomfortable with that because that's a place where I kind of have to weigh in myself. I can't at all be blank slate on that since opposition couldn't respond to the rebuttal, but the fact that Detroit has borrowed money from so many different people wasn't ever mentioned in Gov's case previously. To me, it wasn't a matter of the fact that you guys were assuming normal ways and means that the U.S. government would somehow forgive all of Detroit's debts. To me, that made it more come across that you guys hadn't considered the fact that they owe all of this money to people who have lent them money and that should be paid back. I'm no expert on bankruptcy law in the United States and Title IX, but I don't really think the United States would be in a place, or would think it was in the place, to forgive Detroit's debt, because if it really does owe all that money to all of those people in the United States, it's not money owed to the U.S. government, it's money owed to people in the United States. And if the government's just telling Detroit they don't have to pay all those people back, I don't think those people are going to be particularly happy about that. And I think that that's not something that the government would do as a result. Additionally, government, I liked your argument pointing out the fact that opposition was pretty all over the place with this amount of money. Oh, it can't solve the problems, but it's going to contribute significantly to our debt and destroy GDP for future generations was a little bit of a stretch, and I think they somewhat acknowledged that in their op block when they said, yeah, we're not really fixing the debt issue, but we're not making it worse. I think that their strongest argument that op made regarding financial things was the issue of precedent, and I didn't feel like I got a substantial rebuttal from government on the issue of precedent, and I think considering the net benefits, that's where I ended up voting. I get that there's people, I don't know how many, I don't know if it's a couple 100,000 or whatnot in Detroit who are living a really terrible existence, but opposition convinced me that the possible consequences of precedent and the uncertainty in whether or not this will have any effect outweighed the potential benefits of potentially getting Detroit back on its feet, although opposition pointed out a lot of relevant things like what industry is going to get back on its feet. Detroit has been in decline for a long time, so even if they can kind of float a little bit, aren't they just going to flounder again? And so that's where I ended up voting, was I got more of a potential benefit present and future to the people of the United States than the potential benefit government was trying to offer for the people of Detroit.
Hang on.
Yes.
Okay, so I actually agree with a few things that Becky said, but just voted a little bit differently. I bought the net benefits change. I don't think that really impacted it. Like, it is always going to be, like, of course it would help the people of Detroit just, like, throw money at the problem, but, so I bought that. And the increased taxes thing, I don't think the reason that mattered to me, actually, the alternatives issue, is because if that doesn't work on your guys' side, then you essentially do nothing, right? So, like, if the status quo isn't going to fix the problem, then you're essentially doing nothing. And that's not necessarily automatically going to lose you the round or anything, but that's just what I have to weigh. And I don't believe that, like, all of a sudden, all these people who, like, don't have jobs and are criminals are just going to, like, pay their property taxes on their property that's now worth $2,000 is it going to, like, fix the problem of Detroit. I don't think that would fix it, and so I then end up deciding on the fact that you guys don't do any, like, take any action, obviously, on behalf of Detroit. And so then the precedent issue, I didn't actually bother me that much. It's like, I think if a city is deciding between, like, being financially responsible and, like, ending up like Detroit and then being, like, bailed out, like, they're gonna pick being financially responsible as much as they can. I don't really believe that cities are gonna be like, woohoo, we can end up just like Detroit, let's just, like, spend however we want. So that doesn't really bother me that much, the precedent. I mean, it does end up being a lot of money, and I get that that's, like, a problem, that, like, cities could be bailed out, but, like, in this, and each case will be considered differently, but, like, I don't think that that's as much of an issue. If a city does need to be bailed out, the precedent's not necessarily as much of a problem for me. And so then with the Title IX thing, which I think is also very important, and how I voted, So I took it as more, I think I interpreted it a little bit differently than Becky did, your response. I didn't pick up, like, I didn't think you were saying that we were going to forgive the debts. I think, at least the way, maybe I'm bringing my own thing into this, but the way I interpreted that whole argument, which was an awesome argument on your guys' side, that was awesome to bring that in, but I just, like, kind of bought that they were just going to, like, in the status quo, they still weren't going to be able to pay the people that they owed money to, right? So, like, currently they can't pay those people back. So I kind of believe that, like, hey, if you get the economy going, employ a few more people, like, you got to start somewhere if you ever want to pay these people back, right? So, like, doing nothing's not going to pay them back either. So I, like, kind of suspended the belief that maybe there is, like, a factual law that would force them to pay them back because you're not going to pay them back anyway. So just in, like, my, like, fantasy world where, like, I don't actually know, like, I think Becky said the same thing. It's like, I don't actually know what Title IX does and if you could override it or something like that. But because I didn't know that and because it was, like, kind of awkwardly brought up by you guys in the op block and then he kind of addressed it and then you didn't have a chance to address it again, I just, like, suspend my disbelief or whatever about it and don't think that they're going to forgive the debts at all. I just considered it more of a delay because they can't pay it back anyway. And so then I'm kind of left deciding between, like, hey, they are going to give some money. I don't know how detrimental it is to the debt. I think that's a much bigger problem than bailing out Detroit. I do agree that I think you guys should have impacted out way, way, way more how it impacts people more than just in Detroit. But, like, on that, I don't think it's going to be hugely detrimental to the rest of the country, and I do believe I also would have liked to see on your guys' side, it was really close, just by the way, I was, like, deciding until the last second, but I would have also liked to see you guys tell me, like, exactly where the money's going to go. It's like, I do kind of buy that it isn't going to be too detrimental to the debt, and I also kind of think that it's like, hey, even if you just, like, started to get things going and, like, kept some people in business and, like, kept property values a little bit higher and employed more police officers, that it's like, at least, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how effective it would be, but I, like, because it was such a difficult decision, I bought that, like, it's not going to be, like, the end of the United States and that's not going to be the thing that leads us into depression. And I do buy that it's, like, right now, Detroit's not going to get back up on its feet on its own, so that's that. I mean, the argument also about, like, 2 teenagers versus, like, the mayor and the governor, that was a little bit odd, and also, it's like, and then it's like, you can just claim, you're like, hey, the president said it, so we should for sure do it, and, like, that's not as convincing of an argument, but, and you guys do make a good case that it's like, hey, they haven't been that financially responsible in the past, like, I don't know if these are the guys we should be trusting with the finances in Detroit, because they messed it up in the first place. So I end up going very, very, very close rounds, and I'm not just saying that with you guys.
Ms. Sturz. And Mr. Raskin, the final RP of this camp.
Alright. Starting the standards, I bought the argument that it should be net benefits to the United States. I think if it were net benefits to Detroit, that would just be an automatic win. Because obviously Detroit would rather have the money than not have the money.
Yeah.
Next, on the precedent argument, I think it's a fairly good argument. It wasn't particularly terminalized or impacted out, and I don't know whether there are other cities on the brink that would be affected by this precedent. So essentially what I'm saying is this doesn't have a well spelled out brink scenario for me, or anything approaching that. Then there is the argument about Title IX. I thought that was a good argument, and I thought that if you guys brought that up out of your first speech, you would have very likely been able to win on that.
Is it Title or Chapter?
They said
Title IX is the funding for.
Oh, yeah, the
Yeah.
girls' sports, so it'd be chapter.
That's
the bankruptcy law. But yeah, given that you brought it up in the op block, pretty much any sort of answer from the app takes it out without being able to intervene too much. That being said,
not that you shouldn't have tried it. Like, it was good that you threw it out there for sure.
you should have thrown it out sooner.
Yeah.
That being said, I think that's something that you guys should have thought of during prep, and definitely should have had a backup, which is that all your benefits are stemming from the fact that we're giving money to, like, the people of Detroit for, like, basic social services, and you should have anticipated that some teams would have been able to come up with the fact that it would instead go into debt service, and been able to explain why debt service is also important, for which the most obvious argument is that now that Detroit is going bankrupt and refusing to pay back its debts, people's confidence in other municipal debt goes down, which means that their interest on other municipal debt goes up, and that screws over a bunch of other municipalities. Whereas if Detroit does pay off its debt, then people's trust in other municipal governments goes up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you should have had that backup and not relied so much on the social services argument in case they brought that up sooner. Then it essentially comes down to whether that same $500 million would be enough to get you guys to the impact of reviving the Detroit economy, or whether it would be enough to get you guys to the impact of collapsing the U.S. economy. Given that it's the same link, the argument about how it's like too small of an amount or too large of an amount doesn't flow either way, because both of your arguments rely on the exact same link with the exact same figure. That being said, I think, well, first of all, this didn't factor into my decision too much, but I'm very surprised by the Bernanke quote. Because that goes against like everything that he ever said at other times. If you say that this is because he said that in 2006, which was prior to the recession, he may not have been as inclined to favor deficit spending because there was no reason, since there was a recession. But certainly now, in 2013, I don't think that he would be a deficit hawk, and everything he said at any other time would indicate the opposite. So I'm really not sure where that quote is coming from. And the idea that 14% of our economy will collapse, and that Bernanke would support that economic theory just doesn't sound to me particularly reliable. So you guys might want to double check that quote.
Okay, Arden, give me 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
Okay.
So the way I'm essentially saying that the affirmative is having a stronger link to Detroit, primarily because they're operating on a smaller scale, and I can see them at least getting to some of the impacts of helping social services. The debt argument functions a lot more as sort of a brink scenario, so it either does collapse or it doesn't collapse. And since you don't do enough work to show that it's a big enough thing to measure relative to $16 trillion, I don't think you get over the brink, which means that they get some impacts, although you put the defense on it. Whereas you, it being like an all or nothing thing, you don't get to the all, which means that they have more impacts that they outweigh.
Okay.
Oh wait, sorry, one last thing, it's like a sentence, I swear. I just wanted to clarify that I was not buying your precedent argument in that like cities like Natalie was saying are go crazy. And just, what I was buying was that considering there are a lot of cities and also states that are in bad financial footing right now, including California, I was more buying this, will this mean that the United States will be responsible for every city and state that goes bankrupt in the future, was what was getting me on that.
Yeah, that was the point.
Okay, everybody, this week was awesome, and I'm so impressed by the development of all of you as debaters. And this week went by way faster than I thought it would, but it was like felt like nothing. But you did a great job, and this was a wonderful first camp. And so I really thank you for everything you put into it. And I hope you are interested in pursuing this next year. But we are now officially closed. Okay? Yes.
Who put the note calm down?
Haley was trying to tell me to calm down.
Oh, that was
Getting way too aggressive.